Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got something deeply sobering but absolutely crucial to dive into today, the June 2026 UN Commission of Inquiry report. This is a massive, comprehensive document that meticulously details the conflict's devastating impact on Palestinian children since October 7, 2023. Our goal right now is to look strictly at the facts, the raw data, and the specific incidents that the UN investigated so we can understand exactly what's been happening on the ground.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our structured approach for today. We're going to cover the Commission's findings, the scale of the casualties, the explosives and weapons used, targeted attacks, violence in the West Bank, and finally, the military directives.
All right, Section 1, the UN Commission's findings, examining the official report.
I really want to emphasize upfront that everything we are discussing today is drawn directly from this official UN analysis. We are unpacking data taken strictly from the official summary page of the UN Commission of Inquiry report. This document investigates violations that have resulted in severe, multi-layered physical and psychological harm to children over the course of these hostilities. It's a meticulous, entirely evidence-based account.
Moving on to Section 2, the scale of casualties, unprecedented numbers.
Between October 2023 and October 2025, the report states that at least 20,179 children were killed. And to put that into an even sharper, honestly heartbreaking perspective, just over 1,000 of those kids were under the age of 1.
In addition to the fatalities, another 44,143 children were injured. According to the UN, children represent a staggering 26% of all injured casualties in this conflict. That is more than a quarter of everyone hurt.
But what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that these figures are almost certainly an undercount. Save the Children estimates that another 5,160 children remain missing, buried under the roughly 61 million tons of rubble left in the wake of the bombardment.
Section 3. Explosives, weapons, and injuries. Mechanisms of harm.
So how exactly did casualties reach a scale like this? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the mechanisms of harm, the specific military tactics and weapons cited by the UN. They point to a very distinct shift in military directives. You see, past Israeli operations generally emphasized selective targeting. But the crucial point is this December 2023 directive that shifted the focus to causing maximum damage. The UN report states that this resulted in a de facto blanket permission to target civilian locations widely, heavily contributing to that massive spike in child casualties.
And because of this widespread use of explosive weapons in populated areas, doctors are now treating an absolute epidemic of polytrauma. That's a medical term describing multiple severe injuries impacting several body parts all at the same time. You got to remember, kids just have proportionally larger body surface areas, pliable bones, and thinner skin. The blast waves and unexploded ordnance just tear through their smaller bodies with devastating efficiency, often requiring multiple amputations, tragically without adequate anesthesia.
And this danger, it persists even after formal fighting pauses. The UN investigated the concept of the yellow line. This is an arbitrary, completely unmapped demarcation line enforced by Israeli forces post the October 2025 ceasefire. Because it's invisible, children unintentionally cross it. The UN documented one tragic case where two brothers, just 9 and 10 years old, were killed by a drone strike while simply gathering firewood near this hidden boundary.
All right, Section 4, targeted attacks and tactics, case studies.
Now let's shift our focus from the macro statistical scale down to the micro level to examine specific targeted attacks investigated by the UN. This timeline visualizes one of the most thoroughly investigated incidents in the entire report, the killing of 5.5-year-old Hind Rajab. The family was trapped in a car. The UN found that an Israeli tank, likely from a distance of just 13 to 23 meters away, fired upon them. They concluded that the 401st Brigade deliberately targeted the family vehicle with 7.62mm rounds and later fired a 120mm tank shell directly at the dispatched Red Crescent ambulance, killing the paramedics who were attempting a rescue.
And this brilliantly, terrifyingly, illustrates an alarming technological shift documented in the report. The UN details the use of highly advanced drones, specifically by the Israeli military's Unit 888. We are not just talking about surveillance drones here. These are quadcopters rigged with high-resolution thermal cameras and mounted assault rifles. Some are even modified to fire small pellets that act like cluster munitions inside the human body. In one horrific instance investigated by the UN, a 10-day-old baby was shot in the head by a quadcopter while literally being breastfed inside a tent.
The forensic evidence collected by the UN is strongly reinforced by medical testimonies from visiting doctors who noted deliberate targeting. The UN documented 168 cases of children treated for incredibly precise single gunshot wounds, many directly to the head or chest, inflicted by sniper rifles like the Dan 338 or by drones. The UN assesses that this indicates a high degree of precision and deliberate targeting of children, rather than just accidental crossfire.
Section 5. Violence in the West Bank. Expanding military operations.
The UN report found that these tactics, the drones, the snipers, and high civilian casualties, are not isolated to Gaza alone. Between October 2023 and October 2025, 213 children were killed in the West Bank during operations like summer camps and Iron Wall. What should immediately stand out to you here is the demographic split. 206 of the victims were boys. The UN assesses that this heavily skewed demographic reflects a very specific policy of targeting Palestinian boys due to a gendered security framing that inherently perceives them as threats.
This targeting is largely facilitated by expanded open-fire directives, specifically something called the messing with the ground policy. This essentially allows forces to target anyone bending over or interacting with the ground. The UN details how this exact policy led to a January 2025 drone strike in Taman that killed an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old boy who were simply sitting outside their home.
Section 6. Dehumanization and military directives. The underlying rhetoric.
So you might be wondering, how does a military culture even permit this level of harm? Well, the UN explicitly links the systemic, on-the-ground actions of soldiers to the official statements of political leaders. They document how the dehumanization of Palestinian childhood really starts at the highest political levels, citing statements just like this one from Knesset member Nassim Vatouri, claiming every child born in Gaza is a terrorist right from birth.
Now, what's really interesting about this next point is seeing exactly how that rhetoric translates into policy. When National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir demanded forces shoot anyone approaching the fence, the UN viewed this as a blanket authorization for the open-fire directives we discussed earlier, essentially encouraging soldiers to view absolutely anyone, including kids, as legitimate military targets.
And then you have quotes like this from Knesset member Amit Halevi regarding infants in a maternity ward, which further cements the report's conclusion. The UN finds that this kind of pervasive rhetoric creates a highly permissive military culture. It strips away the protected status of children under international law, shields soldiers from accountability, and creates a tragic environment where targeting a child is viewed as a legitimate act of war.
We've looked at the data, the weapons, the specific investigations, and the policies. The UN report lays bare a landscape of severe, multi-layered harm. So I want to leave you with this to think about as we wrap up. When the basic protections of childhood are systematically dismantled, what happens to the future of international law? And really, how does a permanently scarred generation ever even begin to heal? Thank you for joining me for this explainer.